Hi, this is Scott Amyx with Innovating with Scott Amyx, and today I'm joined by Henry Peter, who is the CTO of Ushur. Henry, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Thank you for
All right,
having
so
me.
why don't we start by, if you could share with us, how did you start Ushur? What was the genesis and also the co-founder that was involved?
Yeah. Me and my co-founder go back more than a decade. So we were part of the Bell Labs initial switching systems, and we worked, AT&T switches, and then Lucent and all that. So, and then coming to the Bay Area, we were part of a founding team. We're not the founders, but founding team, which built soft switches, voice over IP, and all that. So we've been dealing with massive scale systems, and we've been dealing with voice calls, call centers, and all that. But over a period of time, we realized that people trends were changing, and it is not committed voice engagements, and a lot of frustration having to do with connected voice calls and not quite working well with people lifestyles. That's when we started thinking about how easy we could make the interaction between businesses and people. And then it ended up being we were just brainstorming certain sessions out of frustration what was happening at that time. And the word Ushur came in because turns out my co-founder ended up going to a setup where the ushers were taking him to the places where they're supposed to be sitting to watch the show. And that kind of a feeling where you take the customers at the right place. And that's what the genesis was for the name Ushur itself, except for the E, it's U, W. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, so this notion of concierge service, that the service, the distinctive factor as more business become commoditized becomes very
Yeah.
important. And how do you actually start to automate some of that service component? So let's get into a benchmark, Gartner Magic Quadrant for robotic process automation. You have the big power players like the UiPath, that's a unicorn at this point, Blue
Right.
Prism, Automation Anywhere. They're leading the pack when it comes to RPAs, but that pack is also shifting, aren't they? They're moving from intelligent um, process, they're moving from RPAs to intelligent process automation, or IPA, or
Yes.
simply just known as intelligent automation.
Yeah.
So first, why don't we help set the kind of the benchmark between what is an RPA versus an IPA, and
Mhm.
where does Usher fit within that continuum?
Correct. So RPA goes back, many years, more than a decade, when it all started originally with, screen movements when people are making like specialists, call center setup or anywhere, where they take a screen, open a screen, and they click 10 places. Now that is a repetitive task. What they started doing is, okay, if they are clicking those 10 places based on the screen setting, why not repeat that? Right. That's the genesis of the entire RPA solutions. The RPA solution is on premise because we are talking about screens and movements and automating the repetitive movements of the screen. So now you're talking about an on premise solution, and you're talking about repetitive and automating that repetitive task. Fast forward now, right? A lot of things are changing, and we have a lot of cloud solutions, and the way people interact is changing. The end customers are becoming the focus rather than processes. So what you have is not just automating the repetitive task, but first questioning, is that the right repetitive task? Is that 10 steps needed that you did on the screen? Because this day and age, it's different. You process email, you don't go through clicking, but rather you analyze the content of the email, you identify what is the intended topic of the email, and you do it. So in a way, now you're moving your intelligence to cloud because of the availability of plethora of applications, computing, everything. What you need is actually intelligence. So if you only do traditional RPA, you are actually sealing your fate with those 10 steps being automated when actually it's only 2 steps. So that intelligence comes from the cloud. So there comes in our IPA place, like what we bring in to the fore. So in a sense, we become the envy of the traditional RPA because we have the advantage of starting from the cloud. So that's the transition from RPA to IPA.
Okay, so let me just kind of play it back here a little bit.
Yeah.
So RPA mimics human action, whereas AI tries to simulate human intelligence by machines. And just to kind of, again, just go a little bit more concrete, is that from a product maturity where you guys are, in terms of the intelligent automation curve, would you say you guys are kind of between RPA and machine learning with prescriptive analytics and decision engines? Or are you guys further up the work stream in terms of AI with deductive analytics, again, at the cloud?
Yes. Um, I would say we don't, while functionally we do what RPA does, it brings in the creative notion of this entire AI with actually a more machine learning, because AI is a broad spectrum, machine learning with the analysis of the contents. When I say contents, we are talking about contents from the user, content from backend systems, analyze, and then take actions. So while everything that RPA does will not fall under the IPA spectrum, there are going to be some tasks which you do on premise only. But many of the adjunct functionality is going to come from the cloud. And that's the dominant role of IPA players like us.
Okay. Now, you guys focus quite a bit on text, web, voice, and social media and email, as well as a back-end system. So
Yes.
a big component of what you guys do is natural language processing. So I'm just trying to understand and help the audience to understand as well in terms of where are you guys in terms of chatbots versus more natural language processing and trying to translate non-structured types of voice, text, and speech?
Got it. We are very fortunate to have large insurance players, insurance companies, pharmaceuticals, many Fortune 1000 and 500 companies to count as our customers. What they do is to address the notion of chatbot. What they do is also outbound. Many times they reach out to customers in order to get certain information, so whether it has to do with a short-term disability, right? And whether it has to do retrieve with the change of address, they have to get the new address. So outbound notion comes in. So what you finally see is it's actually not just retrieval, or rather, like an FAQ, which primarily is the notion of chatbot because it is initiated by the end user. Whereas we get requirements on both sides. The enterprises have to launch campaigns to the end users as well as allow the end users back and forth. So this is where some of the functionality of chatbot is subsumed in what we do, but it is not just chatbot alone. Uh, I hope that kind of brings the difference.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good starting point to talk about some specific use cases. So you
Yes.
mentioned the insurance sector. So let's walk through maybe a couple of use cases
Yes.
to give some concreteness around where are you guys adding the most value?
Yeah. Let's assume, let's take this case of somebody at work filing for, they're going to take off from work because of pregnancy, right? So they do file with insurance companies. Insurance companies get to know the dates. Now the date is approaching. It may be a month from now, or they may have already taken off. So they want to check with that particular customer whether they have taken off from work, and whether the pregnancy and the surgery was done, and steps like 5 or 6 steps. Today, what happens is they make phone calls. And many times, the last thing a person wants to do going through surgery and all that is to take a phone call from an insurance company, as much as it is important for them, but still the phone calls don't work. So what they do with our system is they launch an automated campaign that reaches out to the end customer. And they get to select whether they have already taken off from work or there is a change of plan. When are they planning to come back, and whether the surgery is over, bunch of questions. And based on the input they give, there may be different decision points. And sometimes it's open-ended text. And when they type in open-ended text, that's where we can analyze the content of that text, where NLP kicks in. So we have both structured and unstructured forms. And this is one example. This falls under short-term disability and all that.
So I want to just pause there for a second. So whether it's structured or unstructured, you're saying that as you actually grab the input from the survey or the questionnaire, does that then automatically kick off a series of workflow on the back end?
Yes. So the workflow, what happens is customers have their own system. Sometimes it's homegrown. Sometimes it may very well be backend systems like Salesforce or ServiceNow, anything like that. Now that kicks off a workflow from Ushur platform, which engages with the user. The workflow is constructed in such a way where there is business intelligence involved in the workflow on Ushur platform. And that kicks off certain structured engagements to the end user, but it can go into unstructured as well.
So I just again, at the cloud level, from an API service, you're interacting with their cloud ERP systems and their back office systems. You're not trying to replicate those capabilities, where you're just simply coordinating the passing of certain data and activities, correct?
Yes, yes. This is an interesting question because it comes into this whole notion of if you talk about system of records, traditional system of records, where they keep all the records, the engagement with the end user or the customer was always an afterthought, because the systems are built, including Salesforce, for you know how many years it has been built, and everything is around the records, but it was not around how people engage. But things have shifted now, so you cannot expect them to come up with the modern engagement system. Something has to come from the outside. And not only that, many enterprises don't have one system of record. They have multiple. Some people have Salesforce, they have homegrown systems. So a platform like us can allow all of them to engage, connect with us, and then we engage with the end user and bring in data back to their system. Right. So yes, it is. Yes,
so you guys really are bridge to that end customer, whether it's outbound or inbound.
That is
regardless
correct.
of the channel. So it's omnichannel.
Yes, it is omnichannel.
Let's go through one more use case. Just again, maybe a very different use case to help the audience really get a sense in terms of what can this really do.
A simple use case is called Wizmo. Where is my order? This is a well-known use case in the industry where people make just phone calls, anxiousness. They want to see, hey, I placed my order. What is the status of it? Imagine getting those thousands of calls, sometimes repeated, to the operators in the call center. Now that can completely be automated, because whether they make phone calls and we deflect to texting, or whether they text to us, it's automated where they can retrieve the information they need, giving certain information without having go through phone calls with specialists dedicated for that repetitive task. So Wizmo is a very good use case.
Yeah. So again, I think you mentioned earlier that there's some capabilities like chatbot that's subsumed into the system. So in this case of where's my order status, you would then authenticate that customer to make sure who they say is who they are. Yes. You would then retrieve the master record to figure out where it is in the life cycle of that journey, and then give that back in a language, natural language chat back to the customer, so they can actually know what things are, and give the impression that you're interacting with essentially a human when in fact it's a machine. Correct?
That's right.
And at the same time, is there any type of kind of record back to the back-end systems of those interactions, or just a daytime stamp in the conversation?
Well, it's interesting. When we built our platform, it was built for integration. That means we really don't know what the business logic, business interest would be. So we provide all the hooks, and we also give SDKs so that to ease their development. While we already publish APIs, they can develop from grounds up. But the reality is sometimes there are best practices. So we give some SDKs. So there are SDKs on Salesforce, ServiceNow, and then we have some backend technology APIs, some stack. What they can do is they can, every point of the interaction, they can track, and they can fetch the data and record it. It's not just one system. They can have multiple systems connected with us and get the information they need, track it, get the stats, and on the fly, maybe even launch another campaign to the end user based on their growing business logic.
So you're able to basically have this open visibility into all the touch points of the customer engagement through the different channels, and then record those things to then provide insights, decision support back to your enterprise customers.
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
All right. One more question, and we'll wrap it up soon, is insurance companies. It seems like they've really kind of latched onto your solution. And allow me to hypothesize, and please correct me if this is even in the right direction, is that certain sectors have been fairly proactive when it comes to, let's say, online chat conversations and reaching as well as receiving and automating some of those interactions. But certain sectors, like the insurance sector, have been fairly slow. So this capability allows them to be able to kind of leapfrog ahead and still be at parity with some of the other sectors without necessarily having to retrain. And that's the real appeal of RPA, is that you don't have to retrain or even change your processes. You just simply kind of layer on top of it. So what exactly is a compelling selling point for insurance sector specifically?
Insurance, even though, when we say the word insurance, it sounds like it's a boring from a process point of view, and they are seen as slow. But what has happened is there has been a lot of disruption happening. As you know, the insurance industry itself is disrupted. What I mean by that is there are a lot of new insurance players coming into the fore, right? You have all sizes of insurance companies doing differently. We've seen from even car insurance to, it's all being challenged, the notion of how insurance plays out. So what is happening is the disruption is prompting them to speed ahead with the digitization. So that is why our entry points, if you see into the insurance companies, are innovation officers many times, right? And digital transformation. And we were surprised ourselves. I mean, they really want to deploy fast ahead. And so sometimes I'm surprised when I know that they're supposed to be slow, but I'm like thinking and saying, well, that's not how the interaction has been for us, because they do want. But I do understand the logistics involved. It can be slower than other industries, but their need, the demand from the marketplace is pretty imminent. So yeah.
So if I'm again understanding correctly, is that because of insurance tech and new innovation that's coming up and that's
Yes.
chipping away or endangering their business model, they're having to play kind of a defensive card. So it's kind of urgent for them to embrace some of this digitization and
Absolutely.
transformation, and you help with some of those aspects.
Yes. Yes.
Let's talk about something a little bit more challenging, perhaps maybe even controversial. Is that one of the biggest, challenge that RPAs have is that from a shareholder value, from a executive, it's very clear cut in terms of the value and the ROI that RPAs provide and IPAs provide. However, the humans that are actually, whether they're clicking through and allowing for the RPAs to mimic, or the IPAs where the humans or the engineers that are essentially kind of designing it, are they not essentially effectively helping machines to replace them, the humans, that is?
Yeah. That question gets asked a lot. The way I've seen is, if you see the business, at the end of the day, a business has to be efficient in what it does. So efficiency is at the heart of any business. So if you are not efficient over a period of time, everybody is going to face, the whole business gets shut down, and you again have the same job issues and all that, right? So what happens is, interestingly, if you really work with the business folks where they are trying to introduce efficiencies, they are not actually talking about FTEs being removed from the equation. In fact, they don't want to lose those FTEs, because we are talking about people who have had the domain knowledge of 10 years, 15 years. And their knowledge, they are trying to put them in places where, when we expedite certain operations, the fallout of those efficiency and automation we do has even more new set of items that have to be tackled with. So that's an interesting play we see repeatedly in organizations. Once you automate, it's not the end of it. What happens is there is like a 10 sequence of things which you never encountered, and that needs even more domain knowledge. That's what we see in our experience. And while that question does come sometimes, but I've not seen that being happening in practically in the companies. So.
Now, just kind of looking at it very objectively, is that the last 20 years, there's been a big movement towards outsourcing, or BPO.
Right.
So certain functions, non-core functions, going to India, Philippines, Costa Rica, and overseas, as well as actually even onshore, moving them into certain lower cost locations like the Midwest and the South, as an example. Now we're starting to see the automation come into the call centers and a lot of the back end office solutions, and then some of the human interactions. I think some of these things is kind of a natural progression. The question really is, the humans, can they truly shift from non-core to core competencies and revenue generating activities? Or will they be able to retrain? So some of the things that you're seeing from your clients, are you seeing, aside from kind of that residual domain expertise, is there a commitment on the enterprises to retrain and to make sure that the humans can be shifted into other areas where they can add the most value?
Yeah, we've seen natural progression happening internally when we go and deploy our systems. What happens is, earlier certain points, like first of all, the training, placing the system there to expedite certain tasks itself involves certain expertise to be tapped from them, and an ongoing manner based on this involves a lot of data. So in an ongoing manner where they actually deal with the data rather than operating on the data, because once you're automating certain things, Now you're the same person who would have operated on the data is actually feeding the data in, training the system and all that. But still, if you take a few years, let's say the system is trained and it is doing repetitive tasks very well, then what happens is there is a shift that takes place within the business process where there are some other challenges that have to be taken place. That's what I call the fallout of automation. So which they may have never seen before. And it depends on different customers. So I can't put them all in one bag, but it depends like what they are trying to automate. And that leads to certain other tasks where still the domain knowledge seems relevant. And of course, it should be on the interest of the business teams to leverage those domain knowledge and apply it still. Even if you automate certain tasks, doesn't mean that everything is said and done. You still have peripheral, various other tasks involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a really important point, and I think sometimes it kind of gets lost in pundits and mainstream media, is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, much like what you said, you have very specific narrow aspects, machine learning, deep learning, that are very, very narrow, very niche, and they're not
Yes.
perfect at all, and they're really
Oh,
not equipped to handle dynamic, multi-constraints of the reality. And
yes.
they're not at a point where you can just put them on autopilot. The human intervention working along with machine computation is going to be the next step. And I think you do bring up a really fair point, which is that as you put in some of these automation, there are other sets of
Yes.
things and capabilities and business issues that's going to rise up where humans are needed to
Yes.
interpret those analytics. So a good example that I always like to use is pilots. For
Mm-hmm.
many really decades at this point, pilots are really not handling every minutia. They have literally thousands of data and gears and mechanisms. They're not controlling every one of those. They're allowing the automation to handle that, and they supervise the automation that sits on top of it.
Yes.
So it's a human computation along with the detailed granularity of the automation underneath it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really where I think we tend to optimize, and it's important to kind of look at it from that perspective versus saying,
Yes.
putting a blanket statement out there that it's going to
Yeah,
displace
I know.
everyone
Yeah,
all at
you're
once.
right.
That's
Yes.
far from the truth.
Yes. Yes. There is always this interplay, supervised thing that is going to go, and yeah.
So we always ask one question at the end, which is, what was your greatest product innovation failure, and what was the lesson learned?
Um, that's a tough one. There's been many instances. Many times failure has always, in my view, has been things that you thought you have already solved, and you end up doing it, but you realize the problem was actually subtly different, and you should have approached that problem differently. So your past experience becomes, in a way, a risk, because you have to look the problem differently. So that's been some of the product failures. So that's why I bring the notion of you have to look at the problem properly and not assume that you have done it before. So that's
Fair enough.
something I've seen that, yeah.
Fair enough. So today I've been joined by Henry Peter,
Yeah.
CTO of Ushur. Thanks for sharing your insight.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.